Yes, hello. So you're watching Poor Africa, and this is part six. We have been considering the reason for the conflicts in Congo, and we have understood very well and clearly this trophy. These guys very proud of what they were doing for the King of Belgium, Leopold II, still revered in Belgium, and these sad African men holding the so-called trophies. They had to bring hands to show that they actually killed people and they didn't waste their bullets. And this habit still going on in Congo today. So we've understood the way the indoctrination occurred, and the reason why Congo alone, because this is psychology, this is social psychology. So we've understood the psychology of Congo, and the reason why Congo needs help from outside is like therapy. A guy cannot therapeutize himself. If you're a patient and you're sick, you can't, and you have psychological problems, you cannot solve it yourself. It's not possible. You see, these guys still go and they look for another tribe, and they go to cut their hands when they fight. And the other tribe, because back in this period, to bring the hands, they didn't want to kill their own people. So they have to go to the next tribe. And this is the basic story of colonization, of the impact of colonization I'm going to explain. That's going to let us understand the reason why you have the wars, the tribal feuds, and the reason why you have the corruption, and why you have the kind of the disdain for human life and for relations or other people of other tribes and the tribal differences in Africa. So we are going to deal with this. There's another country I'm going to pick for this history. This has given us a history on the reason for conflict and wars, and the reason why it's peculiar to Congo. That's the one country where they cut each other's hands. We've seen it here. We've seen the indoctrination. Now we're going to talk about another impact of colonization back on the on a book, back on this website I've been at before, nigerianwiki.com. We are going to understand and study the slave trade. All right, so we are going to look at the slave trade. All right, you go to nigerianwiki.com, a great website that has history on Africa and Nigeria in particular. And under the slave trade, this is a very, very interesting book written by Captain Lord S. Gordon Lennox. All right, we've talked about some other thing he said. This is in the bequest of Edwin Conant from the Harvard Library. In his words, this is colonization. So we want to understand what was the colonization process, because everyone calls it a slave trade and slave trade. When you call it a slave trade, you don't understand exactly what happened, but we need to understand exactly how grave the impact of colonization was and how grave the impact of the slave trade was. All right, so that we appreciate the damage done by Leopold, who was the Hitler of Africa, and what impact this could possibly have 50 years later, because it's only about 50 years later. It's not that long, actually. So what happened? According to this guy, towards evening, because people call it a slave trade, and this is very, very important, so that's why I'm considering this. People call it a slave trade. They say, oh, the African sold people. This is what happened. They sold them to the white man. The white man came along and he says, oh, you want to buy my brother? Take my brother. You want my sister? How much? You're going to give me a mirror? Take her. Give me a touchlight? Take my mom. Give me a matches? Wow. Light a fire? Take my son. This is what people say. No doubt, to an extent, anybody in this world, if you give him enough money, he can sell somebody, right? In America, you have corporate society where people basically sell themselves in labor. So being able to say, oh, you want to take this guy to do your help? I have this Mexican, I'm going to keep him on this side, and I'm going to, give him this stuff to work harder. Selling people can happen. But we need to understand in context what really happened in Africa. What made Africans start? Those who sold, because selling, let's say, is 30%, guns is 90%, but a little bit was by you have to sell eventually. But what happened? This story gives a good idea of how the slave trade occurred. This guy's book in the Harvard Library, he says, towards evening, this is a clip of his expedition in Nigeria. Towards evening, a timid looking native turned up in a canoe and informed us that he was the chief of the town. We asked where all his people had gone, and he told us that all made it off because they were too frightened of the soldiers to remain at home. He, like the others, promised to give us assistance. This is the south part of Nigeria, the swampy area, the main part of Nigeria that was affected by colonization. So they said he ran. This scruffy man was they were scared. Everybody had run. His village had run because they were scared to give the colonialist, the conquistador, assistance. And we told him that if he did not give assistance, his town will be burned. According to Captain Lord Esme Gordon Lennox, we stormed down to Amasana, which was a town supposed to be friendly, and find them 25 goats and 20 chickens for non-assistance. So we are beginning to understand what made people, those who sold, sell. Then returned to Agbeni and burned half. They burned half of this town. So you are in this town and you're looking at the next town and they're burning half of that town, and you are saying, nope, I'm not gonna sell. This is guns blazing, guns to the head. They shoot, you hear a blast, some magic sound you haven't heard before. Birds fall down from the trees, people die, and they say to sell or not to sell. The next thing is you hear towns are being burnt. Neighboring towns are being burnt. Are you gonna sell or not sell? October 1st was spent in continuance of yesterday's incendiarism, by burning every town or farm we could see. I shudder to think of how many houses we have destroyed in these 2 days. They burned every house and every town and farm they could see. This is the southern part of Nigeria. Everybody is familiar with this area. You don't sell, we burn you down. We find you, we burn you down. Are you gonna sell? On our way back to Egbedi in the afternoon, we passed by Sabagria. I have had the preview of visiting this town, and I was actually told some of these stories when I visited this town, Sabagria, in a new state in South Nigeria called Bayelsa State, in conflict right now. And told our old friend Chief Ijo, that's the guy who came in the beginning, that most likely we should burn down Sabagria the next day. This gives us the idea of what colonization was all about. The conquistadors burnt. You sell or not. To sell or to burn. So after this has happened, you've seen the superior power, you've seen what looks like magic, you've seen the destruction, you have been fined, and towns have been burnt. To sell or not to sell, you have to sell. Anybody would sell. I would sell up to my brother. I have to, because if not, my whole town is going to be burnt. Secondly, by selling, I don't think I am selling these people into harm. I think I'm selling them to live another life somewhere else. They're going to work. Hey. So once this has happened, you are gunpoint. This is gunpoint. You start to sell, and when you start to sell, you keep on selling. The great guys who fought, if you read King Jaja, he was brought over. King Jaja of Okpobo was brought over to some part of the west. He was selling. He was a merchant. He was selling, doing business. They didn't like what he was doing, and they poisoned him and on exile, and they killed him. He was granted permission to return to Nigeria, but died en route. They killed him. Anybody who was stubborn, anybody who resisted, was killed. If you are smart and you love your people, you don't want your town burnt to the ground, you don't want your people killed, you have to sell. So this is what happened. And then this now connects to the story we had about Congo. What happens is this: when you are forced to provide 1,000 slaves, provide 1,000 slaves or we burn your town down. You think the only way you can go about this is to raid a neighboring town and get their people. So this is how the history of conflict started in Africa. You have to invade a neighboring town and catch those people, because if not, your town is going to be burnt. The other town comes back, and this is how intertribal conflict started. Because to survive, just like the Congolese, you go and cut the hands of people from another tribe and submit the hands, baskets of hands. It's called baskets of hands. King Leopold's ghost. And then the other town comes and attacks you to get your people to provide its quota of slaves to survive. And this is how the conflict started, intertribal conflict started, that persists till today. So we've understood the origin and the genesis of conflict in Africa. We are going to go ahead to understand corruption, governments, and the reason, what the impacts that last till today, to understand exactly what has been done, what is being done, and what could be averted in part 7 of Poor Africa.